Tonight's game is brought to you by our amazing sponsors, and by viewers like you on Patreon. When you use the links in the description, you're helping us keep the channel going, so thank you. Patrons get access to our Discord community, early video releases, and higher tiers even get exclusive behind-the-scenes content and commentary. Sign up today and join the crew. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps us out. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Cobblepot, piloting Kenrith, the Return King. This is an unorthodox build of Kenrith that wins with unique combos. It uses Brewer's Advantage to surprise its opponents while generating card advantage with its commander. Next, we have Zeb, piloting Atraxa, Grand Unifier. This is a mid-range deck that grinds advantage while using its commander to amass a ton of cards. It then closes out the game with Thrasios Oracle or infinite mana combos. After that, we have Chris, piloting the partner pair of Rograkh, son of Rograkh, and Thrasios, Triton Hero. This deck leans heavily into Gaia's Cradle to generate a ton of mana and draw its deck with Thrasios. Finally, we have Chad, piloting Derevi, Imperial Tactician. This is a mid-range deck that uses Derevi to accelerate mana production. It also synergizes with engines such as Birthing Pod or the One Ring. Before we get into tonight's game, I wanted to talk about the sponsor for this video, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is a service that takes the hassle out of trying to offload your extra cards. They provide top buy list value for your cards without all the extra effort of traditional buy listing. The service is quick and easy. Simply send them your unsorted cards, and then Card Conduit will sort, grade, and find the best buy list price for each of your cards. They are fully transparent, giving you a detailed report of exactly what you sent and what they are paying you for each card. You can also see exactly what you'll get for your cards ahead of time by going to their price check tool on their website. Their fees are reasonable and their customer service is fantastic. They process quickly and submit their payments super fast. I personally used Card Conduit twice before they ever became a sponsor. They were amazing, guiding me through the process and clarifying any questions or hesitations that I had. I got a fair price for my cards, and they literally saved me dozens of hours in the process. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. So give Card Conduit a try today. I will be using them for all of my extra cards from now on, and I recommend that you do the same. Without further ado, let's kick off this boisterous, bombastic, blazing battle. Cobblepot wins the hot dog eating competition and gets to start us off. Cobble draws a card for turn and plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts Avacyn's Pilgrim and passes the turn. Zeb draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts an Esper Sentinel and ends his turn. Chris draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts Mystic Remora. Esper Sentinel triggers and Zeb draws a card. Chris casts his commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. He gives the turn to Chad. Chad draws, plays a Marsh Flats, and passes. Cobble draws and plays a Gaia's Cradle. He ships the turn to Zeb. Zeb draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, paying a life. In response, Cobble flashes in an Aven Mind Sensor. In response to Mind Sensor, Chad cracks his Marsh Flats, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts Enlightened Tutor. Esper and Remora trigger, Chris draws, and in response to Remora, Zeb casts Vampiric Tutor. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Then Zeb draws through Esper. In response to Aven, Zeb casts Force of Will, paying a life and exiling a blue card targeting Mind Sensor. Remora triggers and Chris draws again. Force counters Mind Sensor and Enlightened Tutor resolves. Chad fetches up a Mana Vault onto the top of his library, then Zeb fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts Birds of Paradise and ends his turn. During his upkeep, Chris lets his Remora die. He draws and plays a Gaia's Cradle. He casts Thunder Trap Trainer. Thunder Trap enters, Chris looks at the top 4, revealing a Lightning Bolt into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size. Chad draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts a Bloom Tender, then passes the turn. Cobble draws and plays a Forbidden Orchard. He casts Rhystic Study, not paying for Esper. He ships the turn. Zeb draws and casts Chrome Mox. Rhystic triggers and Cobble draws. It enters and Zeb imprints Invasion of Ikoria. He boosts the combat and attacks Cobble with Esper Sentinel. Cobble takes it and Zeb passes the turn. Chris draws and plays a Windswept Teeth. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts Cryptolith Rites, paying the Rhystic tax. Esper triggers and Zeb draws. He casts his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero, paying for Rhystic again. He gives the turn to Chad. Chad draws and casts his commander, Derevi, Imperial Tactician, not paying for Rhystic. It enters, untapping Bloom Tender. He ships the turn. Cobble draws and plays a Shifting Woodland. He casts Carpet of Flowers and Zeb draws through Esper. In response, Zeb casts Swan Song, targeting Carpet. Rhystic triggers and Cobble draws. Carpet is countered and Cobble creates a 2/2 bird. He casts Birds of Paradise. He taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Chad a spirit to help cast his commander, Kenrith, the Return King. He passes to Zeb. At the end of Cobble's turn, Zeb flashes in an Opposition Agent. Rhystic triggers and Cobble draws a card. The turn moves to Zeb. Zeb draws and casts Dothy Voidwalker, paying for Rhystic. He ends his turn. Chris draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He casts Seedborn Muse, paying for Rhystic. He ships the turn to Chad. Chris untaps with Chad through Seedborn. Chad draws and casts Enduring Vitality, paying for Rhystic. He moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Derevi. Zeb takes it, Derevi triggers, and Chad untaps with Loom Tender. In his second main phase, he casts Mana Vault, paying for Esper and Rhystic. He passes. At the end of Chad's turn, Chris activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Chrome Mox into his hand. He activates Thrasios again, scrying 1 and revealing a Command Tower onto the battlefield tapped. Chris untaps with Cobble through Seedborn. Cobble draws and casts Runic Armasaur. In response, Chris activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Transmute artifact into his hand. He activates Thrasios, scrying and revealing a Scalding Tarn onto the battlefield tapped. Armasaur resolves and Cobble taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Chad a spirit to help cast Elesh Norn, Grand Cenobite. The table did not see that coming, and Elesh Norn resolves. It enters, wiping most of the board. The creatures that die are all exiled with void counters through Dothy Voidwalker. Cobble moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Kenrith. Zeb takes 7, and Cobble passes the turn. Chris untaps with Zeb through Seedborn. Zeb draws and casts Demonic Tutor. Rhystic triggers and Cobble draws a card. In response, Chris cracks his Scalding Tarn, paying a life. Runic Armasaur triggers and Cobble draws again. Then Chris fetches up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. He cracks his Misty, paying a life, and Cobble draws again through Runic Armasaur. He fetches up an island onto the battlefield. Chris hard casts Flare of Duplication, targeting Demonic Tutor and paying for Rhystic. Flare copies Demonic Tutor and Chris fetches up a card into his hand. Then Zeb fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Mystic Remora and ships the turn. Chris draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He casts Growing Rights of Vitlamok, paying for Rhystic. Remora triggers and Zeb draws a card. Growing Rights enters, Chris looks at the top 4, revealing an Enduring Vitality into his hand. He casts Enduring Vitality, paying for Rhystic. He gives the turn to Chad. Chris untaps with Chad through Seedborn. Chad draws and plays a Beseiju, who endures as his land for turn. He pays 2 life to help cast Birthing Pod. Rhystic and Mystic trigger, and in response, Chris casts an Overloaded Cyclonic Rift, paying for Rhystic. Remora triggers and Zeb draws a card. Chad floats mana with his creatures, then Rift resolves, and Chris's opponent's non-land permanents are bounced. Then Zeb and Cobble draw, and Birthing Pod resolves. Next, Chad casts a Mana Vault. He casts Enduring Vitality. In response, Chris cracks his Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up a Breeding Pool onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. Vitality resolves and Chad pays 2 life to activate Birthing Pod, sacrificing Vitality. Vitality triggers and returns to the battlefield as an enchantment. Then Chad fetches up a Preston the Vanisher onto the battlefield. He passes to Cobble. Chris untaps with Cobble through Seedborn. Cobble draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts Birds of Paradise. He casts Haywire Might. In response, Chris activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Chord of Calling into his hand. Cobble casts Avacyn's Pilgrim. He taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Zeb a spirit to help cast Archon of Emeria. He ships the turn to Zeb. Chris untaps with Zeb through Seedborn. Zeb draws and plays a Command Tower tapped through Archon. He recasts Mystic Remora. In response, Chris activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Mox Amber into his hand. He activates Thrasios again, scrying and revealing a Forest onto the battlefield tapped. Zeb passes, discarding the hand size. Chris draws and pays 2 life to help cast Phyrexian Metamorph. It enters as a copy of Haywire Might. He activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Deflecting Swat into his hand. He moves to his end step, and Growing Rights of Itlamok triggers. It transforms into Itlamok, Cradle of the Sun. Chris passes, discarding the hand size. Chris untaps with Chad through Seedborn. Chad draws and recasts his commander, Derevi. In response, Chris sacrifices Haywire Might, gaining 2 life and exiling Birthing Pod. Derevi enters, untapping Tundra. He gives the turn to Cobble. At the end of Chad's turn, Chris activates Thrasios 3 times, scrying and revealing a Mental Misstep into his hand, Prismatic Vista onto the battlefield tapped, and an Eternal Witness into his hand. The turn moves to Cobble. Chris untaps with Cobble through Seedborn. Cobble draws and plays a Bayou. He recasts his commander, Kenrith. He moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Archon. Zeb takes it, and Cobble ships the turn. At the end of Cobble's turn, Chris activates Thrasios 3 times, scrying and revealing a Wheel of Fortune, Crop Rotation, and Mana Vault into his hand. Chris untaps with Zeb through Seedborn. During his upkeep, Zeb pays to keep his Remora. He draws and plays an Overgrown Tomb, into play tapped. He casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Shieldred the Apocalypse. He gives the turn to Chris. At the end of Zeb's turn, Chris casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Prismatic Vista as an additional cost. In response, Cobble activates Kenrith's last ability, returning Aven Mindcensor to the battlefield. Then Chris looks at the top 4 and fails to find. Still in the end step, Chris activates Thrasios 3 times, scrying and revealing a Retraction Helix, the One Ring, and a Flusterstorm into his hand. Chris draws and casts Retraction Helix, targeting Enduring Vitality. Remora triggers and Zeb draws. He activates Enduring Vitality, bouncing Archon of Emeria. He casts Cloudstone Curio and Zeb draws through Remora. He casts Chord of Calling where X equals 2 and Zeb draws again. Chris holds priority and casts Dramatic Reversal. Remora triggers and Zeb draws. Then Chris untaps his non-land permanents. He activates Vitality through Retraction Helix, targeting Aven Mindcensor. In response, Zeb casts Cyclonic Rift, targeting Cloudstone Curio. In response, Chris casts Flusterstorm with all copies targeting Cyclonic Rift. Remora triggers and Zeb draws a card. In response, Zeb casts his own Flusterstorm with all copies targeting Chord of Calling. With no other answers, Flusterstorm counters Chord, Flusterstorm counters Rift, and then Aven bounces. Next, Chris casts Mox Amber and Zeb draws through Remora. He casts Mana Vault and Zeb draws again. He casts his commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. Not able to piece together a win, Chris gives the turn to Chad. Chris untaps with Chad through Seaborn. Chad draws and plays a Hallowed Fountain into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Emil the Blessed. In response, Cobble taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Zeb a spirit to activate Haywire Might, targeting Mana Vault. Chris floats mana from Vault, then Vault is exiled and Cobble gains 2 life. Then Emil resolves. Chad activates Emil, targeting Derevi. Derevi flickers, Preston the Vanisher triggers, and Chad creates a copy of Derevi. The token dies, and both Derevis trigger, targeting Tundra and Tropical Island. In response, Chris casts Born Upon a Wind, paying for Remora. In response, Zeb casts Pact of Negation, targeting Born Upon a Wind. In response, Chris casts Deflecting Swat for its alternate cost, targeting Pact. Swat resolves, changing the target of Pact to Swat itself. Pact fizzles, Born resolves, and Chris draws a card. Still in response to Derevi's trigger, Chris flashes in an Eternal Witness. It enters, and Chris returns Chord of Calling from his graveyard to his hand. He flashes in Chord of Calling where X equals 2. Remora triggers, and Zeb draws. With no answers, Chord resolves. Chris fetches up a Cloud of Fairies onto the battlefield. Cloud of Fairies and Cloudstone Curio trigger. Fairies untaps Itlimoc and an island, and Curio bounces Rograkh. Chris flashes in Rograkh. He presents a loop of continually bouncing and recasting Rograkh and Cloud of Fairies through Cloudstone, floating mana each time. He does this over and over, adding infinite mana. He activates Thrasios over and over, scrying and drawing through some of his deck. He flashes in a Candelabra of Tawnos, paying for Remora. He flashes in Steel Enchantment, targeting Remora and paying for it. He activates Thrasios, drawing more cards. He flashes in Finale of Devastation where X equals 4, fetching up a Displacer Kitten onto the battlefield. He casts a Lotus Petal. Kitten triggers and flickers Eternal Witness. Witness enters and returns Lightning Bolt to his hand. Chris cracks his Lotus Petal to cast Lightning Bolt, targeting Zeb. Kitten triggers, targeting Eternal Witness. Witness flickers, and Chris returns Lotus Petal to his hand. He flashes in Lotus Petal. In response, Chad casts Angel's Grace. Grace resolves, and Chad cannot lose the game this turn. Then Lotus Petal resolves. Chris presents a loop of continually casting Lotus Petal and Lightning Bolt, dealing 3 to an opponent each time. Each time he casts one of these spells, he flickers Witness through Kitten, returning the other to his hand. He does this over and over until everyone is dead except Chad, who goes to 1 life. Still protected under Angel's Grace, Chris passes to Chad. Chris untaps with Chad through Seaborn. During Chad's upkeep, Chris casts Lightning Bolt, killing Chad, and Chris wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what an awesome game. The most valuable card in tonight's game, sponsored by Luxury Playstyle, goes to Seaborn Muse. It was no question that this card allowed Chris to snowball out of control so quickly. The engine that Seaborn creates allowed Chris to amass an unbeatable amount of cards in only a few turns. Chris turned that into victory tonight, and the rest of the table was just unable to stop him. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time and we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.